Welcome, everybody. My name is Roland Schuster. I'm the Managing Director of NFP and President and Founder of Tango. Thanks for joining us. I can't see your faces, but a couple special hellos to Wendy, Lisa, Stephanie. Guys, I know you well. Thanks for joining us. Today we have an interesting topic as part of our continued education series: cyber liability, insurance premiums. Why are they exploding? What you can do about that cost. The world of cyber seems to be front and center in our world today, probably more so than ever before. And we have a couple experts to talk about those things. Augusto Russell, he's the VP of Benefits, property casualty background, expert in cyber security from an insurance perspective. Augusto Russell, thanks for joining us. And then we have Bob Thomas, who is an ultra Kyberian from Kyber Security, and an expert in this field as well. So both Kyber and NFP are very important partners of Tango, and I want to thank you guys for carving out some time to enlighten our audience here. What I'd like to do is just give everybody a quick update on Tango. Most of you folks probably know Tango pretty well, so I'm not going to go too deep on this, but Tango continues to grow. Our alignment with NFP has availed us a lot more tentacles out there in the market. We are seeing significant growth in our membership. We are just shy of 1,500 nonprofits now that have joined Tango. And it's representing, gosh, at last count, it was at least 160 and probably more aligned to 170,000 people that work in the nonprofit sector. That gives us pretty enormous clout to do things on behalf of the sector, which really, when you look at Tango, what we're all about is creating a partnership between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world for the mutual benefit of all. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is partner with socially conscious businesses like Kyber, like NFP, to really help the sector. That's being done through driving innovation, helping create cost savings, and help you guys move your mission forward. Next slide, please. Just a quick recap. So we really have three legs of our stool. One is professional development and collaboration. Today's webinar is a perfect example of that. Last year, I think we ran 54, 52 workshops, all for free for the sector. We have a very robust schedule going forward into 2022. We are bringing back our in-person, knock wood, in-person conference, which will be this fall. So this is an opportunity for us to share the collective expertise that Tango has with its partner group and various connections with the sector to help you guys be more efficient in your day-to-day operations. We have preferred services, so all of our partners are offering their services out to our membership on a preferred basis. We have arrangements with everybody that is unique to Tango. So if you are in the market, we encourage you to talk to our partner group. And then lastly, goodwill and mission support. That's a fun part of what we all get to do. And it's really helping channel the emphasis that Tango has created in a very, very positive way to support the sector. As you know, we have a Tango Foundation, and that is meant to provide scholarships to people that work in the nonprofit sector, who have been nominated by their employer as a rising star, and we attach dollars to that person to help them get better trained, so they can be more impactful within your organizations. Those scholarships are going to be given out in May this year, and there is still time to nominate a rising star. So if any of you folks have somebody who you think very, very highly of in your organization that is deserving of some financial backing to further their education in the sector, let us know. We've had in the past a handful of single moms get their bachelor's degree on the tab of Tango, so they could qualify for their next promotion. We've had quite a bit of leadership training over the years, so there's still time. We will be announcing those winners on May 12th. at Celebrate Nonprofit Night, which is going to be held at the Hartford Yard Goat Stadium. We are giving away close to 900 tickets to nonprofits to attend the game. We're going to have our awards given on the field to our scholarship recipients. We're going to have a child throw out the first pitch. It happens to coincide with the TV show The Office night. So Stanley from The Office is going to be with us that night. So we encourage all of you guys to join us if you can, or send your staff. Should be a super fun night. Great opportunity to network and get out. And if you need tickets, just reach out to Rob. We're happy to supply some tickets for you guys. So that's our community. There's a lot going on. Thank you for your support of it. Thank you for your involvement in it. The bigger we get, the more we can do to support the sector. I think there might be one more slide, Rob. Yeah, and it all happens because of our partner group. The reason you as nonprofits don't have to pay to be part of Tango is because of the generosity and the philosophical commitment that our partner group has. They fund the overhead of Tango, so nonprofits don't have to pay to be members. So thank you all, and at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to our capable presenters. So, Bob, are you going to lead it off, or Augusto?
Yep. No,
Bob?
I'm first up.
Okay, Bob, we'll take it away. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
No problem. Thank you very much, Ron. Appreciate that. And thanks, Rob, for setting this up. I'm Bob Thomas. I'm from Kyber Security. We are a managed security services provider. And just a couple of housekeeping items. We're happy to take interactive questions throughout. So this is dynamic and interactive. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, you have that capability to ask a question midstream. If you're more comfortable typing rather than speaking, you can feel free to put stuff into the chat box. Questions are fine, or comments. We can take them in there. So feel free to do that throughout. We're going to talk a little bit about data breach and the impact that it might have to an organization. And then following that up, Augusto is going to talk about not just how you can potentially secure insurance as an offset to the costs associated with a breach, but also some methods to combat breaches. And I think both of us will probably talk about tools and how to successfully avoid being breached. Can you break that out for me, Rob? So just speaking quickly about what a data breach is, probably obvious, but any sensitive information, and there are quite a few descriptions about this, what constitutes sensitive information, and even finable breaches. That information can be had by the state attorney's office. The Attorney General has put out an update as of last October 1st. They've changed a lot of the rules. They are now even enticing organizations to put better protections in place in order to avoid fines. So if you have a program in place that is to the standards that they've set, like National Institute of Standards and Technology Cyber Security framework, if you meet those criteria, even if you're breached, you will not be fined. Some of the problems that come along with being breached, obviously confidential information gets out into the wild, and then obviously you have notification requirements and potential fines. And I think there's one more bullet here, Rob. And it's not really, a lot of people think about breaches and targets of breaches being very large enterprise organizations. And yeah, I think it's probably logical to think that way and see that those folks are in the news day in and day out. But I think it's more important to understand the ones that don't make the news because they're not reported, they don't get the press, are the small to mid-sized businesses that are impacted by the same type of breaches. They may not seem as notoriable. Everybody talks about the fuel pipeline because that impacted, not just areas, but entire states. The Eastern Seaboard, I was in the midst of it when it happened. 11 gas stations in a row where I couldn't get gas, pulling off the side of the road, trying to figure out what to do. So there are impacts at the enterprise level, but day in and day out, we get calls from folks that have been breached, have had money stolen out of accounts, and are looking for help and how to avoid this. Next slide. Thanks. Just some ideas on what type of information is out there that is commonly looked at and what should be protected. Personally identifiable information, that is one of the items that is extensively described by the Attorney General on the new program that they rolled out in October, describing exactly what pieces apply to PII. It's not just name and address or name, email address. It has to be combined with some other factor. Maybe that other factor is an ID number, could be a driver's license number. It could be an identification number that is not your social security number, but your insurance provider may be providing ID number. Those coupled together, that make it personally identifiable and trackable back to you. Same thing with PHI and EPHI. Protected health information is everywhere, it seems. Even within organizations that don't really collect it. But if you've got a staff member, some employee that has a medical condition, maybe you have a piece of paper on file about them. That has to be protected. It should be encrypted. It should not be accessible by anyone other than the people that need it to do their jobs. Those are key pieces. I think the next few are really, really important to think about. Confidential information, and that's kind of a blanket statement, but I couple that with financial information or access to financial information. We were called in by someone who had their email breached. Because their email was breached, their bank account got breached. And of course, funds were taken out, not able to get it back. They've got to go after an insurance claim. They've got to hire a lawyer. There's a lot of problems, a lot of follow-on that come from that. IP, intellectual property, is a huge one. We got called by another now client that deals in IP, and they asked us to help them with a breach. So these are not big companies. These are technically, the ones I'm talking about are 50 or less individuals in a firm, and but they're subject to the same types of issues that the big Fortune 1000s are. And you could say any other data value. It could be a sales list, a client list. Your competitor gets a hold of that, it could run you right out of business. So there are different pieces that make up risk. And now, obviously, if you do get breached, if any of this information is compromised, you could look at it from a couple of different ways when you talk about financial loss. I think, yes, delay in operations, I can't run my business because I don't have access to data. I agree, it's important. Fines, and they are steep, it's not per occurrence, it's typically per record. Depending on the occurrence. So if it's your first time that you've been breached and data is released into the wild, the fines aren't so dramatic, but they will increase, but they are multiplied by how many records, how many individual pieces of information have been compromised. And I think about financial loss, hard dollar loss. One of those clients that reached out to us to say, can you help me? Well, you're not a client, but if you want help, we can certainly trail this back if you have logging turned on, and let's try to help and figure out how they got in. A lot of times you can't get the money back. That's a difficult one, and it might involve a claim. But and then the follow on from that, weakened brand. Brand reputation is a big one. Probably have to engage with a PR firm in order to try to spin the situation. Maybe we had this happen, but we went to a security provider and they were able to help us do notifications, help us improve our security, all the things that you maybe should have done previously, but then under the gun had to do. And at that point, probably your cyber liability insurance carrier made some suggestions on exactly how to improve your security and reduce risk. And I think hand in hand client mistrust. Are your clients going to trust you after you've had a breach? Maybe if you show improvement, maybe if you tell them exactly what happened, but there's definitely a concern there. And then I think you got, coupled with that, legal issues. There could be lawsuits from information released. And I think the reputation damage is probably, we got a client out of New Jersey that was in the midst of a breach, and that was his first concern. Am I going to have to notify my clients? What are they going to say when I do? Those types of things are really concerning. We've got a quick poll here, and you should use the chat box to use to insert the answer to this. But people, this term isn't thrown around anywhere. How big is your breach circle? But everybody talks about this stuff from time to time, and it's really interesting to understand. Do you know anybody? How many organizations do you know of that have been breached in the last 2 years? And it seems to, obviously we're in the industry, so we hear a lot more than probably most others. Same with Augusto. I'm sure he hears about this, unfortunately, almost daily. But it'd be interesting to know how folks have heard about this. If they've got friends or folks that they do business with.
Yeah, it looks like a couple people said 1 or 2.
Yeah, we've got somebody that said 2 to 3. So it's it is. I think it is a pretty standard thing at this point in time to know someone that has either been breached or has. And I had a client last night call me about one, and it wasn't for them. It was personally related, but they wanted to know what to do, and is it really a risk? So everybody seems to know somebody that's involved. Excellent. So with respect to cyber liability insurance, and obviously Augusto is going to talk a lot about this, but it's a fail-safe protection that people employ in order to protect them and recover losses. And they could be from different types of issues. I think, if we really roll back time, it started as an offshoot of business interruption insurance. You had business interruption. I had a server failure. I was out for a week. Those types of things. I can think of a client from quite a while ago. It's probably 15, 20 years ago. And their business interruption insurance paid for a server replacement because that was the type of coverage they had. They experienced an outage and they paid for the hardware and the setup of the new device. That has evolved, obviously, over time to security breaches and what was the loss and how, if I don't have cash equivalents to be able to, and reserves to be able to pay for how to deal with that loss, I'm going to use cyber liability as my safety net in that instance. And really, at this point, as I said at the beginning of this, I don't think anyone's necessarily immune to this. Large organizations, small organizations can be a handful of users. We've gotten all types of calls for all sorts of help from folks that have fallen victim to I hate to use the word hack because that's not necessarily how things are done. Nobody's sitting there at a computer in a basement with a hoodie on trying to hack into somebody's network. That's not real anymore. These are big businesses developing software, reselling it to other people who are employing that software. And that software is very sophisticated and it is not necessarily targeted. They're not looking specifically for a company and individual. This is a broadcast mechanism where they're trying to hit as many networks as possible and find a path in. And once they get in, they start looking for data, they start looking at email, and then they start to really do what I would call hardcore research on an organization in order to either create a ransomware situation where they're encrypting your data, they're locking it so that you've got to pay to unlock it if you don't have a quality and reliable backup, or they're wire fraud. They're trying to extract money out of bank accounts or get you to send money to a different location, a different bank account, those types of things. That's incredibly common. I think that's really where you have to have protections in place. Next. I think this is you, Augusto. Right?
Yes. Did we go one too many?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And I will cover the topic of cyber liability. Some of you in this audience I know and have worked with personally, so thanks for attending. I want to talk about the importance of cyber liability. Organizations generally, especially the small ones, don't tend to think that they are targets, but unfortunately, a larger portion of the attacks are happening on the smaller organizations because perhaps they're just not spending the kind of money in their budget to do the prophylactic measures to protect themselves, do enough training for cyber protections, and so on. But yeah, approximately 50 to 60% of small organizations that suffer a breach end up closing shortly after, according to Inc. magazine and a couple other periodicals. So when a breach occurs, you're really going to want to have an expert and resources to handle the cyber breach to get you through it all. And after you've done all due diligence, then having an insurance policy is clearly a good funding mechanism to cover the costs that can be costly in most cases. We know the goal of this presentation is to inform you as to why the cyber liability insurance premiums are increasing and what you can do about it. But I thought we'd like to spend a little time in setting or explaining why this coverage is important, what does it cover, what are the cost drivers, and in the end, hopefully you come out of here becoming a better consumer and purchaser of this must-have coverage in today's environment full of cyber risk and threats. So anyway, the next slide. Okay, thanks, Rob. So yeah, so the reasons you purchase it is you want to protect data that is not normally, as you'll see in the next slide or two, not covered under normal core policies. And you're insuring against the losses that are relevant to the loss of data. And not only that, it's just also, as you'll see in the next few slides, there are other exposures that you have that are tangential to the breach itself. So I'll review the cost of the data breach, and I don't know of any industry that's really not impacted, certainly in today's environment, on who has a data breach risk. It's everybody, nearly everybody. Next slide, Rob. By the way, feel free to put up questions in the chat room if you have any burning question, and we'll certainly try and make time for the end of the presentation to have a Q&A. And I see Stephanie said that we'll send out a copy of the deck to the participants, Stephanie. Okay, so why are we at where we at with regards to just spiraling costs on cyber? But to begin with, I want you to know that the standard policy, your property liability, your package policy, your business owner's package policy, general liability, your core policies, they do not provide you or have not provided you cyber liability coverage. Lately, there's some minimal protection that's been offered through like a business owner's policy or package policy, but it's very minimal. And if you're not careful and if you think you have some because you see this little minimal coverage in your policy and you don't have a robust standalone policy, don't be lulled into thinking that you're adequately protected. You may not be. And in some cases, they slap on an endorsement that give you a few of the bells and whistles. And I'll explain to you what a standard policy, a robust policy would be as we get into the slides ahead of us. But at the end of the day, what I want you to come out of here with is that if you rely on these minimal protection, you're going to be less than satisfied when the breach happens. But if you do have that coverage, the add-on coverage, and then you do buy a standalone policy, the caveat here is that you want to review these coverages under separate policies and sort of determine how what's called the other insurance clause in each of those policies will play out. Essentially, the other insurance clause in each of the policy will point to the other policy as being primary and then being excess. So you want to coordinate the coverages. And in some cases, we found that it's maybe prudent to eliminate those gimme coverages, the small gimme coverages under the package policy when you have a standalone policy that's more robust. That way there's no question of who pays what first and what deductibles apply and so on. So hopefully that's a helpful hint in determining or reviewing what you currently have if you have it. Next slide. Claims. So what's happened, and Bob alluded to the big claim that happened about a year ago, Colonial Pipeline in May of 2021. Colonial Pipeline had paid something in the order of $4.4 million in ransomware. And so in order for them to get back to operations, anyway, they're one of many high profile type of corporations that have had ransomware. Ransomware has become such a proliferate criminal activity. In fact, it has such a devastating impact on the cyber liability insurance industry that the rates, that's the main driver of creating these incredible increases in premiums. We've seen renewals doubling and tripling when the underwriter has taken your application or renewal application to determine what systems you have in place and what protections you have in place. So we've had one insurance company whose CEO was talking to shareholders and saying how there are certain headwinds that they're facing in terms of losses and claims and profitability. And second or third on that list, besides the wildfires in the West and all the catastrophic losses going on, was right up there was ransomware. And what happens sometimes is that, and certainly in this particular insurance company, they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They basically, we don't know what we have on the books. Up to this point in time, they've been very casual and cavalier about ransomware because it's a small amount that's normally been asked for. But because of the size of these ransomware now, and all of a sudden everyone is on alert. And so what they've done is insurance companies are underwriting their book of business and making sure that the underwriting criteria on new business as well as renewals will meet their new guidelines. And because of that, that's what's driving most of the rates. And what I want to stress is that there's some new players. So now that's why we're what's called the hard market. The underwriting has gotten tighter and the pricing has gotten much more. And there's new players in the marketplace that have actually have this new structures and models for pricing. Well, they actually do stress tests on your websites and your portals to see if there's any deficiencies in there. And if they find out any of these deficiencies, they could easily not offer you coverage or not renew you, or in some cases, in most cases rather, they dramatically increase the renewal premium, and then they give you recommendations of what to fix. So for you to protect your competitive premiums in the future and even your insurability in some cases, you want to connect with tech folks like Kyber to make sure that the protocols and prophylactic measures that they're looking for are in place, and that there's training happening to mitigate future claims. Next slide, Rob. So let me just talk a little bit about some of the policies that to look for and what coverages are available under a standalone robust policy. But the first thing I want to point out here is when you're looking, by the way, no policies are they're not uniform in any way. They're all different from one another. They'll have a lot of basic similarities in terms of first party, third party coverages, but every single one of the companies have their own particular coverage flavor to distinguish themselves from their competitors. The coverages that you want to be looking, the coverages that are being reduced or restricted or limited are some of these on the screen that you see are the ones you want to be looking for. First of all, first and foremost is you want full prior acts coverage. These are all claims made policy, and basically that means that you have to report the claim when the policy is in effect. And if you cancel the policy or change the policy to another carrier, you have to make sure you do the right thing to keep continuity of coverage and the ability to report any claim that happened in the past. When it comes to cyber, you want to go back as far as you can, because you never know when some virus was embedded in your system, so that there's no exclusion that's going to take place because you didn't have the full prior acts coverage. So that's one you want to be careful of. And then some of them will just reduce coverage, like cybercrime, social engineering, transfer fraud, which I'll talk about in a second, the next couple of slides. They're adding co-insurance to ransomware, meaning they're going to cost share with you what the payout might be. There's going to be sublimits, lowered sublimits on business interruption. Bob alluded to business income as the main problem that he had early on, and when it comes to a data breach. And then, of course, they're going to ask every one of you to start thinking about or having in place such things, such security measures as multi-factor authentication. One thing I want you to get out of this presentation is that as you put your budget together, you cannot ignore the cost that you need to make room in your budget to beef up your security, beef up your protocols, such as multi-factor authentication. There's a cost to that. And then there's training involved. And if they don't see that these good practices or best practices are being in place, they're either not going to insure you or jack up your premium, and it's not going to get any better down the road because this problem is here to stay. Next slide, Rob. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, we're good.
Good. Okay. All right. So I apologize for the next 3 or 4 slides. There's a lot of verbiage in it. I only put these in because when you get this next slide, you at least have something to read again. But I'll try and hover these fairly quickly so we have time for Q&As. Basically, when you look at a cyber liability policy, there's a commonality of first-party coverages and third-party coverages. Let me talk about the first-party coverages. They are the cost to you, to your organization. This is where your out-of-pocket will come into play. Of course, business income interruption is number one, where think of Amazon. If they're shut down, they can't make any sale online and therefore they'll lose income. Data restoration, it's what it costs to put you back together for the data that may have been lost or compromised. And then, of course, cyber extortion or ransomware, that's what I've been talking about earlier on, probably the biggest headache, the biggest problem in the space. And that's why the rates are going up so much. The crisis management, Bob mentioned about reputational damage. This is where you're going to need a PR firm to sort of, respond to not only to your clients and your stakeholders, but also to the public, the newspapers and so on. So that clearly is going to be a first party expense as well. And the next slide, you'll see that when there's a breach that happens, what practically happens is that the governing authorities, in this case in Connecticut, you have the Attorney General. It may be federal governing bodies who will be brought in, FBI, et cetera, depending on the severity and the nature of the data that's been stolen. But once you notify them, and you're required to notify them within a certain period of time, they're going to investigate what it is that happened to see if there's any material harm to the public, to their constituents, to your clients. And if there's even the cost that you're going to incur long before you even determine if there's any material harm. The cyber policy covers you for those type of expenses as well, a first party expense. But should they find material harm or damage to the public, your constituents, the people whose data you're holding, they're going to make you notify the injured parties or the affected parties. Notification, credit watch, that's going to be coming out of your pocket. It usually could be 1 to 2 years. And then, of course, not in this list, the governing authorities will also fine you for letting a breach happen. The forensic cost is probably one of the more expensive element when it comes to data breach costs. The forensics is, how did this happen? What can we do to prevent in the future? And it takes highly sophisticated IT folks to figure that out. The social engineering and funds transfer fraud, this is sort of the crime coverage where, your accountant, your bookkeeper was getting an email from the president or CEO saying, hey, I need you to pay $30,000 or $50,000, whatever the money is, and it seems legitimate. You've seen it, the phishing scam, or that someone might have somehow was able to steal money from you, whether it's on your premises or from your banking premises, the bank's premises, using a computer. Either they stole the password or somehow got you to pass or part with your money. And that's the crime coverage that's available within the cyber liability policy. But the caveat here is that if you have a separate crime policy, you want to coordinate that policy with any crime coverage under your cyber policy. So again, there's no duplication of coverage. There's no other insurance clause coming into play, and whose deductible is paid out first, et cetera. So you want to try and clean that up. Next slide. So we now have a third party. So this is people suing you for damages. And the damage really is from the security breach, the network security liability. It could be denial of service, unauthorized use of the system, malicious code that they got infected by because of your system was hacked, or sorry, Bob, was not hacked, but there's some criminal activity that took place. There's privacy liability. Again, that's just sensitive personal identifiable information and PHI and so on. All those things that the law requires you to protect, and if you fail to protect them, and people are either suffering financial losses as a result of that and then claiming against you. And of course, I've already mentioned that there's regulatory fines and actions against you. Each state has their own set of laws. One of the things that's really important to know about having a cyber liability policy, it may be that you are an organization that has data that involves people and organizations and companies outside of the state of Connecticut. You're going to have to comply with whatever the governing laws on cyber in those states are going to impose upon you to follow. And having a cyber liability insurance company knows how to deal with those laws and what those laws are. Just another benefit to having a standalone robust policy. And then, of course, there's the additional there's the media liability. Think of this as sort of libel, slander. And if you have this in your blogs, your website, that's where cyber liability picks that up, because your core policy might cover you for billboards or printed material. But if once you're in cyberspace, you need media liability under the cyber policy to have that type of protection. Next slide. So coverage enhancements. I said that in the prior slides that there's some reduction in coverages, but there's also additions of coverages. We talked about cybercrime, again, social engineering, funds transfer fraud, the telephone fraud. Some of these things may already be in your crime policy, but you want to coordinate again with your cyber policy regarding the crime where there may be duplication of coverage. Bricking loss, when your computer is completely useless, it becomes a pretty big paperweight on your desk. There's a cost to replacing your hardware. Contingent bodily injury is sort of an emerging risk. Think of, I don't know if anyone in this call is in this space, but if you had a company where you're a platform for medical records being stored and the medical records was hacked, or that the data in it was compromised, and somehow the doctors are relying on that information to do the right diagnoses, and then causes bodily injury as a result of that. That is something you'll have to insure under your cyber policy because of the breach. The defense costs, you want to know if it's inside or outside the limit. Of course, the best thing to do is have it to be outside of the limit. So there's additional amount of money to pay for the defense and keeping intact your policy limit to pay for any damages. Invoice manipulation is really just someone somehow getting to do a false pretense for you to pay a bogus invoice. But again, there's more of these emerging coverages. Insurance companies tend to be really behind what's happening in the real world. They try and catch up, and this is where you find these enhancements long after they've sort of been in circulation. Next slide. Okay, so what's the cost of data breach? These are just the statistics. You can Google these. Of note, of course, many of the people on the calls are small to mid-sized businesses. The average cost of a breach is $108,000. But the average in the U.S. is in the millions. I believe it's 4 or 5 million. And then the ransomware, again, $1.85 million was sort of a benchmark for the cost. Again, Colonial Pipeline was 4.4 million, just to give you a scale. What happens is that when you look at how much insurance should you buy, right? According to the Ponemon Institute in 2021, the cost per record is going to be about $161 of the total overall cost or average cost in mitigating or responding to a breach. So if you have an idea of what the number of records you currently have, just multiply it by $160 to give you a ballpark of what your exposure is. That number changes year to year. Last year was $146. A few years ago is over $200. But anyway, that's a good rough estimate of what you think you might have for exposure. Next slide, Rob.
That's really an interesting point, Augusto, because I was just given one of the cyber insurance questionnaires by one of my clients to help them out and answer the questions. And literally the first 2 questions that were asked were around how many records do you have? Do you have personally identifiable information in your possession? If so, how many records do you estimate that to be? Because obviously the insurance company is concerned about if these are released into the wild, if they get breached and that stuff has been compromised, they want to know what the exposure is.
Yes, and the PHI, or private health information, actually has a lot more street value than getting credit cards. They can bill Medicare much more readily if they have your medical information, that sort of thing. So, you know, there's a cyber breach calculator, believe it or not. It's www.eriskhub, eriskhub.com, and you'll if you're interested in that, email me and I'll send you that calculator. It's kind of interesting. But here, the type of costs associated with it, there's legal, forensic, crisis management, notification, call handling, what's that, credit watch, the credit monitoring, and then identity theft resolution, the third-party claims. As you can see, some of these are pretty costly, especially in forensics and legal expense. Now, when a breach happens, the insurance company is going to be your best friend because they have a system and structure in place, in addition or in collaboration with your IT folks in trying to resolve and mitigate the damages. You'll have a breach coach, and usually it's a lawyer, and they'll have at their disposal the PR people, the IT people who can do the forensics, who you may want to use for notification and credit watch and so on. So that's the beauty of having an insurance policy. In addition to everything you've done trying to prevent yourself from getting breached to begin with by working with your IT folks like Kyber. So it should be no mystery to us when you look at these costs for these categories to see how quickly it could add up as to the number or the cost per record that again changes from year to year. And so hopefully that gives you an idea of the importance of not only working with your IT people and as a management team coming up with an understanding that you may need to look at your budget and figure out what do we need to do. One, forget the insurance for a second, but we don't want this to happen. How do we prevent it from happening? And you got to take those measures by putting in policies and the defense mechanisms that your IT folks can help you with. And then, of course, you buy the insurance because you will need that should something happen to cover the costs that I've just went over. And then at the end of the day, you're also making sure that you're a good insured prospect for an insurance company that hopefully will give you the best rates available. That's really the goal that you want to set. I think that's the end of my presentation, Bob, and I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Augusto. That was great, incredible information. It's really interesting to hear you talk about how to best position yourself as a company to be insurable, and the things that we've heard about. And there's a list on the screen that we can talk briefly about of different types of protections. I really think the most important thing to understand is that, yes, there are plenty of protections in place and there are plenty available, but if you don't have some of these in place, you're almost uninsurable at some point. We've seen questionnaires come back from clients where they filled them out, they asked us for help, we submitted them with them to their carrier and their agent, and they came back as denied. They are basically going naked with no coverage because they had no multi-factor authentication on their login or protecting their email. They had no logging of their information and no storage. They had a firewall, but it wasn't updated. They had insufficient or inadequate backup. I think, Augusto, one of the really interesting things you talked about is that I think this is probably a technique for newer carriers that have entered the market, but they're doing a technology assessment to figure out exactly where a potential client of theirs stands with regard to protections. One of these items disable open RDP port. So RDP is remote desktop protocol. So somebody wants to get remote access into their network. A way, this is not the way, and it's certainly not the suggested way, is to open up a port on the firewall that allows that type of traffic from outside to inside. Well, it's not necessarily opening it up specifically for you. You're opening it up to the world. And we did a security assessment for someone that was delivered last week to the client. And we said, here you go. Your data center that you're using in Massachusetts has chosen to leave that port open. It wasn't by accident. They did it intentionally, and we called them on it. And they said, oh, it's not really a big problem. We have multi-factor authentication turned on, so it won't be an issue. We beg to differ. That particular port was getting hit almost 13,000 times a day by somebody trying to breach that network. All someone would have to do is get a pop-up on their phone that says, oh, do you want to approve this login? And maybe they didn't even realize it wasn't their login. They assume they're sitting in front of their machine, that it generated a reattempted login. They say, okay, and they've let the bad guy in without even knowing. Those are typical items that we see every day that the insurance carriers are worried about. You know, that network's going to get breached. It's not, will they ever get? They're going to get in. 10,000 times in one day, they hit the administrator account to try to look for the password. They don't have account locking turned on. All the things, all the protections that should be in place were not. And yeah, okay, we found them. You know, we turned the information over to the client, but you know, it's not the client's responsibility to close that hole. You know, it's the provider. But at the end of the day, the insurance carrier wants to feel comfortable that proper protections and proper procedures are in place, and that the network is and the data is being watched over. You know,
Bob, on top of that, if many of you are probably using cloud server, cloud data storage providers, even though it might be in your example, Bob, if it's their fault, if you will,
yeah.
From your client's perspective, the data you're storing, you are the store, or you are the face to your clients, and they're going to go after you. If you go after the vendors, they generally have a limitation to the cost of the service as their limitation of liability. So another reason why you need to make sure your own protection is in place, not relying on third party.
Yeah,
we have a question. Oh, there's a question once you're done from Laura, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to be brief, and then we'll touch on questions. But Augusto, you're 100% right. If you read contracts from service providers, what are they really responsible for with respect to quote unquote damages? Well, if you paid $5,000 a month for the service, $5,000 is the max credit that you can request and that you're obligated to receive from them. That's it. It's not like, oh, well, you know, this breach happened on your dime, so you have to pay the breach expenses and get me back in operation and get all my data back. That is not necessarily on them, and that's why the protection is so important.
Yeah.
Just quickly to talk about a couple of these items, you know, email authentication. We consider this to be at the top of the food chain. And I don't really care if you're at Office 365, you're at Google using, you know, the G Suite or Google Workspace, they have multi-factor capabilities. If it's not turned on, you will be breached. You'll get exposed. They will find a way. And it's almost too easy for them to go buy credentials on the dark web that have been up for sale, take those credentials. Maybe they are the same, maybe they're similar to what you're using today, and then they try to get into your Office 365 or G Suite. That is, I hate to say it's too easy, but if you don't have multi-factor turned on, they will pound away and try to find a way in and brute force their way in, just like the remote desktop stuff. You've got to keep up with patching your systems. So that's That should be automatic in today's society. You know, we've got systems that we put on every computer that monitor whether they need a patch, when are they going to be updated, do they need a reboot to apply a patch. Devices get added to networks all the time. That could create a vulnerability of sorts. We do vulnerability scanning. I think those are good practices for companies to employ. And Augusto, I heard you say it probably 2 or 3 times, train and test your employees. Train them, test them to make sure that not that they just pass the training, but test them with phishing and try to trick them, and see if they absorb the training. And if not, remedial training. They have to go back to the drawing board and additional. You have to make this a part of it. And to answer, let me just pop up the chat question that Laura had. So she says, we have Office 365, which has a lot of those safeguards. Is that helping with some of the cybersecurity insurance? If you want, Augusto, you can answer. I'll follow up or whatever you'd like to do.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So from my perspective, the few things that come to mind with Office 365 is, number one, and I can't say it enough, multi-factor has got to be turned on. That should be number one. I think Microsoft has made it so easy to engage and turn on their Office 365. I'm just talking from an email perspective. We could talk about OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams and all the other pieces, but at the end of the day, the email is the path in. Typically, Office 365 multi-factor, or anybody else's multi-factor that will work with it. I think logging, I don't know how many times we've been called in to help with a breach for someone. And the first question we ask, did you have logging turned on? And the answer comes back as, what? What logging? Well, we turned on the accounts. I'm sure logging's on. And we have to say, I'm sure it's not, because unfortunately it doesn't get turned on by default. Microsoft makes it easy to get mail flowing, but the security features in it aren't automatically enabled. Encryption. So if you're transferring sensitive data back and forth, that's an option that needs to be turned on. It's a manual turn on, and that logging needs to be captured. And then the logging that comes with Office 365 is almost insignificant. It will be overwritten in a matter of days. It has to be copied offsite, and I think you have to monitor it. You know, somebody needs to be looking at that. We use the Security Operations Center to 24/7, 365, looking to make sure nobody's setting up forwarding rules, that they're not logging in from, you know, if logging in from Russia right now, but I logged in this morning. How is that possible? Well, if somebody's watching it, they will figure out that it's not possible, and that's a breach. Those pieces are really important to have in place. And I'll tell you, the questionnaires that we get from insurance providers are asking these exact questions. Do you have Office 365? If you do you have multi-factor enabled for all accounts? Not do you have it enabled? It has to be all accounts. And are you monitoring with advanced threat detection software? If you're not doing those, you go to the bottom of the food chain on rate. I'm positive you don't get discounts for those types of answers.
If they offer you coverage at all.
Well, I think that's a really good point, Augusto.
Yeah.
I think the question is, you know, if you answer those to the negatory, I don't, they're not going to like you. And I think it may not be a policy they want to write.
Yep. So,
but I do believe those are really, really important items. And one last poll that we have, if you've got access to pop it in the chat within the last year, have you reviewed your coverage as it relates to the organization? And we've got, you know, and I think one of the most important things, we just had a discussion with a client the other day. Augusto, you said there's those, I'll call them bundled coverages, for lack of a better word. You know, is that enough? Do you know what it is that is bundled in, and is it really equivalent to having a standalone policy and understanding exactly what, you know, does it have access to a PR firm? Are you going to get all that assistance that that Augusto talked about, I'll just say kind of quarterbacking the response to a breach and getting the help that you need from your carrier. That's really, I think that's a really big deal. Thank you very much, folks, for inserting the information and responses. That was really nice. Thank you. And I think we got one more slide just talking about some key questions. Some of these, I think, Augusto, you might be able to answer, but they're items that we, I think, have talked about. What factors are considered by insurance carriers when rating cyber coverage? You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. They want to know what you do, what kind of a data you maintain. Is it PII or PHI, and how much of it? And then, of course, the underwriting questions of what kind of policies and procedures and protective measures you have in place from a technical perspective.
Yeah. And then the next one, who owns the data, who's responsible? It was the item that you used as an example. Yep. Yeah, okay, well, you own the data, but whether it's stored in the cloud, where's the responsibility? I think you know, this is when backup is critical. You need to make sure backups are being done, that they're being tested. We even have people making secondary copies of data to alternate sites that they have control over. So, okay, well, we believe our cloud provider is doing the right thing and backing up, but we're going to have another safety net in place. I think that's a really great thing to do. And it kind of dovetails with the whole outsourcing my data to a third-party vendor. You still have risk and you still have responsibility. Do I have to wait? This is a really interesting one. Do I have to wait for an insurance company to approve my response to a breach, or can I just respond? You have a thought on that?
Yeah, the first thing you do is you let the insurance company know, and they're going to take, and they're going to go from the moment you let them know within hours of connecting with you. And of course, let your IT people know as well, because they're going to coordinate with the insurance, the breach coach from the insurance company. Don't go it alone. Don't do anything without the insurance company. It's their policy that's on the hook, and the $1 million or $2 million, whatever limit you've got, is in play. You don't want to jeopardize negating any coverage because of something silly you might have done.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to follow up with, we for folks that are on the call or folks that we've got a way to help you out. There's I think it's a couple of slides ahead. We can run you guys through we call it a insurance preparedness assessment. We do a lot of these types of things where we're trying to help people with their questionnaires and whether they are really prepared to get coverage, to get discounts, to be a good client and really have the right protections in place so that the cyber carriers are receptive to their application. If you put your information in, we can get in touch with you, and it's a very, very quick questionnaire. I think it's maybe 22 questions that we built specifically for this, and give you an assessment and a score of exactly how you fare, and if there are gaps, we can tell you exactly what the gaps are, and most importantly, that you can face those head on and see we do have Office 365, we do have multi-factor, but really every account has to be covered, and any account that's not is an open threat point. So if you our information's on the next slide, you can put your information in to the chat. You can reach out to us via email. There's a link to our website on that previous slide. Everybody's going to get the deck, so they have it. But we're happy to help and see if we can make an assessment and give you some guidance at no charge for being able to get the best possible coverage and be a good fit.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bob. We're a bit over time, but I want to make sure that all the questions have been answered. Laura, I know you chimed in the chat group, but I think if you can unmute your microphone if you have any questions. Anybody?
I just had that one question asking, and I don't know if it was answered, about are they if you are doing, because I know that we just are doing a training around this. We've done it before, but training with our staff that you guys mentioned about, just the making sure that they're aware and know, what to do and stuff like that if they get stuff that's like via email or something like that. If we're doing that kind of stuff, is that helping with these cybersecurity stuff policies?
I'll take that, Bob. Yes, it does, because you're answering the questionnaire that they're giving you in the affirmative, and the more in the affirmative you're providing for underwriting, yes, it's definitely helping you keep your costs lower and have it be as competitive as it can be.
And one of the things that that folks want to see is not that just that you're doing training, but there is a program for it, that you're tracking who's being trained. As new employees come on within the first 30 days, those folks are part of the training pool, that they are not, no offense meant by this, forgotten until the next time the annual training or semi-annual training comes around. The programs that we run, as soon as any folks are onboarded, they immediately get dropped into the pool, and within, we guarantee 30 days, but it's typically within 7 days they're on the training schedule and getting materials delivered to them, and then follow on to that is testing. So I think being able to track it and confirm that it's being done and it's applied to everyone is important.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Great. I think we're good. So yeah, as we mentioned, we'll be sending out the deck to everybody. We have a recording as well. You can forward this to any of your coworkers. Just quickly, we're actually having a webinar tomorrow on COVID-19's impact on state unemployment insurance. It's a view of the current and future challenges facing employers. So feel free to join in. If it's not in your wheelhouse, anybody in your organization can join us. And thank you, obviously, to Bob and Augusto, and take advantage of what our partners have to offer. They have plenty of exclusive offerings. You can go to our partner page and see what they offer. And I'll flip it over to you, Roland. We should be all set.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And thanks, Augusto and Bob. Nice job. Just wanted to have one closing comment. I received an email from one of the attendees. She's logged off now, inquiring about how to find information on the scholarship, the Rising Star Scholarship Award. So if you go to tangoalliance.org, that's our website. Under the foundation tab, there's information on how to nominate someone. So I just wanted to pass that on and thank everyone for participating, and have a great day, guys.
Great.
Thanks
very
all.
much.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care, guys. Thank you.